The acrid stench of burnt earth and gunpowder hung heavy in the air, a permanent shroud over the ravaged landscape. Twisted metal skeletons of what were once valiant machines jutted from the mud, stark monuments to forgotten battles. Despair painted the faces of the weary soldiers, their eyes hollowed by endless nights of fear and the constant, nagging hunger. This was the Western Front in the brutal heart of World War II, a place where hope was a luxury few could afford, and survival was a daily, grueling negotiation with death. Amidst this desolation, where every breath was a gamble and every shadow a potential enemy, what extraordinary innovation, what audacious spark of human ingenuity, could possibly ignite from the very ashes of desperation? This is the story of Sergeant Thomas Miller, known to his men simply as Tommy. A man whose hands, though scarred and calloused, possessed an almost magical ability to coax life back into ailing engines, to understand the intricate whispers of gears and pistons. His mechanical aptitude was legendary in their outfit, a rare gift in a war that devoured machines as ruthlessly as it did men. But beneath his calm, focused exterior, Tommy carried a profound burden, a grief that gnawed at his soul, the loss of his younger brother, a mere boy, swallowed by the war's insatiable maw just months prior. That tragedy had etched a new resolve into Tommy, a silent promise to himself that no more of his men, no more of his adopted family, would perish on his watch if he could help it. He was a natural leader, not by rank alone, but by the quiet confidence he inspired. Tommy and his small reconnaissance unit, a dozen hardened souls, found themselves deep behind enemy lines, navigating the treacherous, dense forests of occupied territory. Their mission had been critical, gathering intelligence on enemy movements, but now, every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, felt like a prelude to discovery. Their only lifeline, their battered but reliable jeep, was their one link to safety, their single hope of escaping the tightening noose of enemy patrols. The ambush came swiftly, a sudden, violent eruption of gunfire from the tree-line. Tommy instinctively slammed the jeep into reverse, swerving wildly as bullets peppered the vehicle's metal hide. His men returned fire, their rifles spitting defiance into the darkening woods. The exchange was brief but brutal. When the last echo of gunfire faded, leaving behind only the ringing silence of the forest and the acrid smell of spent casings, the jeep sat motionless, its engine sputtering a final, dying breath. A stray bullet had found its mark, piercing a critical component, leaving the vehicle utterly crippled. Adding to their woes, their radio, perched precariously on the dashboard, had been shattered, its vital wires severed, its communications silenced forever. Stranded, deep in enemy territory, with no way to call for help, surrounded by unseen foes, the chilling reality of their predicament began to sink in. They were isolated, vulnerable, and facing a seemingly impossible situation. If you're captivated by untold stories of human ingenuity and resilience forged in the crucible of conflict, then make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more incredible tales from history's darkest chapters. We delve into the extraordinary moments when ordinary people performed the unimaginable. The grim realization settled over the unit like a suffocating blanket. 12 men, isolated and exposed, deep within hostile territory, now faced a stark, agonizing truth: their chances of survival dwindled with every passing minute. Their limited rations, meticulously portioned out before the ambush, now seemed woefully insufficient for what lay ahead. Each man clutched his rifle tighter, the cold steel a small comfort against the growing unease. Ammunition was finite, a precious resource to be conserved, each bullet a potential life saved or lost. The constant threat of discovery, a gnawing fear that had always lingered at the edges of their minds, now swelled into an unbearable pressure. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every distant call of a bird, sent a jolt of adrenaline through their veins, reminding them of the unseen eyes that might be watching, the unseen ears that might be listening. Tommy, acutely aware of the fear coiling in his men, felt the immense weight of leadership press down upon him. He was not just responsible for their mission, but for their very lives, for guiding them back to safety, a promise he had silently made to his fallen brother. The forest, once a mere tactical obstacle, now felt like a living entity, an unforgiving labyrinth designed to swallow them whole. Their situation was dire, bordering on hopeless, yet Tommy knew despair was a luxury they couldn't afford. They had to move, but how? The primary antagonists weren't just the German patrols, relentless in their sweep of the occupied lands, but also the brutal, unforgiving wilderness itself. The dense canopy filtered out the sun, plunging the forest into a perpetual twilight, making navigation treacherous. The terrain was broken and uneven, unsuitable for travel by foot with wounded men or the limited supplies they carried. But the most immediate, insurmountable obstacle was the crippled jeep, its engine stubbornly silent, an inert metal beast mocking their predicament. Time, a cruel master, was rapidly running out before their compromised position became fully known to the enemy. With every hour that passed, the search perimeter would tighten, their chances of escape dwindling to nothing. Tommy, ever the pragmatist, refused to surrender to the overwhelming odds. He immediately set about assessing the damage, his men forming a tight, anxious huddle around him. Corporal Davies, a wiry, experienced soldier with a knack for mechanics, offered a spare wrench. Private Jenkins, young and eager, held a flashlight steady, its beam cutting through the deepening gloom. Together, they pried open the hood, revealing the mangled guts of the engine. A gaping hole in the fuel line, ruptured hoses, and several shrapnel-damaged components bore testament to the intensity of the ambush. They worked with grim determination, their faces smudged with grease and smeared with sweat, the air thick with the smell of oil and hopelessness. Tommy instructed them to search for any salvageable parts, any spare pieces that might offer a glimmer of hope. They scoured the wreckage, their eyes darting over bent metal and frayed wires, their fingers probing every crack and crevice. They tried to patch the fuel line with a piece of rubber tubing from a canteen, a desperate improvisation. They attempted to jury-rig the electrical system with scavenged wires from a discarded field phone. With their limited tools, a single wrench, a multi-tool, and a roll of electrical tape, they tried every conventional repair they knew, every trick of the trade. But the damage was too extensive, too fundamental. The engine, a complex symphony of precision engineering, was beyond their ability to mend with their paltry resources. Each failed attempt chipped away at their fragile morale. The hopeful murmurs that had accompanied their initial efforts slowly evaporated, replaced by the heavy silence of resignation. Despair, a palpable entity, began to settle in among the soldiers, its cold tendrils reaching into their hearts. Their faces, once etched with determination, now showed signs of weariness, of growing hopelessness. Tommy could feel it, the creeping dread that threatened to consume them all. He knew that conventional solutions were exhausted. They needed something radical, something beyond the ordinary, if any of them were to make it out alive. The jeep, their last hope, remained a lifeless hulk, a monument to their impossible situation. The heavy silence was shattered by a sudden, sharp crackle of twigs just beyond their makeshift perimeter. Every man froze, rifles snapped upward, muzzles tracking the sound. It wasn't the clumsy tread of a large animal. This was deliberate, human movement. Tommy held up a fist, signaling absolute stillness, his eyes narrowed, scanning the dense foliage. Then, a glimpse of Feldgrau, the distinctive German uniform, flickered through the trees. Not a full patrol, but a small scout party, 3 men, moving cautiously, their MP40s held at the ready. They had been discovered. Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs, a primal drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. He swallowed hard, remembering his promise. Hold, he whispered, barely audible. The Germans were too close now, their hushed voices a guttural murmur that sent shivers down their spines. One of the scouts, a young man, peered directly toward their position, his eyes searching. Tommy knew they had mere seconds before the jig was up. He took a breath, aimed carefully, and a single, precise shot rang out, felling the lead scout instantly. Chaos erupted. His men opened fire, a concentrated burst that tore through the undergrowth, scattering the remaining 2 enemy soldiers. They didn't stand a chance. The skirmish was brutal, swift, and over in less than a minute. 2 more German bodies lay still amidst the leaves, their mission of discovery tragically cut short. The air reeked of cordite. But the victory felt hollow. They had survived, yes, but at a terrible cost. The gunfire, though brief, would echo for miles through the quiet forest. Larger forces would now be alerted. Their presence was no longer a secret. The thin veil of concealment had been ripped away, and the hunt was on. Tommy surveyed the scene, his jaw clenched. Their situation had just escalated from dire to catastrophic. He knew a full-scale search and destroy mission would soon be underway. They had perhaps hours, at most, before the forest would be swarming with enemy troops. He scanned their surroundings desperately, his gaze falling upon the wreckage of their jeep, then roving over the immediate area, searching for anything, any tiny spark of an idea that could deliver them from this impossible predicament. His eyes caught on a discarded, dented metal fuel canister, its side ripped open, lying near a pile of splintered wood from a long-abandoned field hospital. A flicker of something, a distant memory, stirred in his mind. He remembered a dusty, tattered engineering textbook from his youth, one of his father's prized possessions. It spoke of obscure, almost forgotten methods of propulsion, born from necessity during times of fuel scarcity. Gasification. The principle of converting solid combustibles, wood, charcoal, even garbage, into a flammable gas that could power an internal combustion engine. It was an old technology, clunky and inefficient, largely abandoned with the advent of abundant liquid fuels. But now, in this moment of absolute desperation, it roared back into his consciousness with startling clarity. His eyes darted from the wood to the torn canister, then to something else. A rusty, forgotten metal trash bin, lying on its side, half buried in the leaves near the edge of a burnt-out farmhouse. It was cylindrical, made of thick-gauge steel, with a hinged lid. A crazy, almost insane idea began to form in his mind, linking the disparate elements. The trash bin. The wood. The engine. He could build a gasifier. He turned to his men, their faces etched with anxiety and exhaustion. He knew what he was about to say would sound utterly mad. "All right, listen up," Tommy began, his voice firm, conveying a conviction he wasn't entirely feeling. "The engine's shot. We all know that. But we've got wood. We've got this." He pointed to the trash bin, then back at the crippled jeep. "We're not going to fix the engine as it is. We're going to give it a new way to breathe. We're going to build a trash bin engine." A stunned silence met his words. Corporal Davies finally broke it, his brow furrowed in disbelief. A trash bin engine, Sarge? You saying we're gonna make this jeep run on garbage?" Tommy nodded, a grim determination hardening his features. "Essentially, yes. We're going to turn that bin into a gasifier. We'll burn charcoal and wood in it, produce a combustible gas, and feed it directly into the engine's intake. It's antiquated tech, boys, but it's real. And it's our only way out of here." The skepticism was thick in the air, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of hope, born of pure desperation, began to ignite in the eyes of his men. The audacious, almost unbelievable concept was their last, desperate gamble. The audacious, almost unbelievable concept was their last, desperate gamble. Hesitation, however, was a luxury they no longer possessed. Tommy's declaration, made with an unwavering gaze, had quelled the initial shock, replacing it with a grim understanding of their predicament. They had nothing left to lose. Corporal Davies, despite his initial disbelief, was the first to move, grabbing a shovel from the back of the jeep. "All right, Sarge," he grunted. "What are we looking for?" The others, their faces still, etched with a mixture of bewilderment and a fragile glimmer of hope, began to stir, their minds grappling with the sheer audacity of Tommy's plan. "Everything," Tommy replied, sweeping his arm across the desolate landscape. "Scraps of metal, pipes, wires, anything that can be bent, hammered, or welded. And charcoal. Lots of charcoal. From that burnout farmhouse, from old fire pits, whatever we can find." The men dispersed, a dozen determined figures fanning out across the bombed-out periphery of the forest. Each discovery, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem under normal circumstances, became a triumph, a small victory against the encroaching despair. Private Jenkins unearthed a coil of rusted but still pliable wire from a tangle of barbed fence. Another soldier found a section of corrugated pipe, mangled but salvageable. From the skeletal remains of the farmhouse, they painstakingly collected charred wood, carefully crumbling it into usable charcoal. The dented metal trash bin, once an emblem of mundane refuse, was now meticulously cleaned and brought to Tommy, its rusty surface gleaming with new purpose under the fading light. As the makeshift workshop took shape around the crippled jeep, Tommy faced a daunting array of technical hurdles. The trash bin, while robust, needed modifications to become a functional gasifier. First, sealing the unit, it had to be airtight to control the burn and direct the resulting gas. They used scraps of metal sheeting, scavenged from a collapsed shed, hammering them into rough patches, sealing joints with mud and even melted tar from a nearby road. Optimizing the burn was another challenge. Too much air, and it would simply be a bonfire. Too little, and the process wouldn't generate enough gas. Tommy meticulously poked holes for air intake, creating rudimentary dampers from flattened cans. Each adjustment was a process of trial and error, a delicate balance between theory and the harsh reality of their limited resources. Fabricating a cooling system was paramount. The gas produced would be searingly hot and needed to cool rapidly before entering the engine, otherwise, it would damage components. Tommy envisioned a crude heat exchanger, using sections of bent pipes snaking through a trough of water. But first, they needed pipes that could withstand the heat and a container for the water. More scavenging ensued, yielding sections of copper tubing from a defunct boiler and a dented metal drum. Integrating this Rube Goldberg-esque apparatus with the Jeep's damaged engine was perhaps the most intricate task. They had to bypass the regular fuel system entirely, fabricating new connections to feed the gas directly into the carburetor. There were frustrating setbacks, welds that wouldn't hold, pipes that leaked, and once, a small, alarming explosion of rich, unburned gas that singed Tommy's eyebrows and sent plumes of black smoke into the air, momentarily raising fears of discovery. Yet, through it all, Tommy's unyielding determination slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to rekindle hope among his men. He worked tirelessly, his hands black with soot and grease, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. He explained each step, however briefly, involving them in the minutiae of the impossible task. They watched him, first with weary skepticism, then with growing fascination, and finally, with renewed purpose. Corporal Davies became Tommy's shadow, anticipating his needs, fetching tools, and offering an extra pair of strong hands. Private Jenkins, initially a simple light bearer, soon learned to cut wire to Tommy's precise specifications, to hammer metal without complaint, and to understand the rudimentary principles of the burgeoning contraption. They were no longer just soldiers waiting for rescue or death. They were engineers, mechanics, and laborers, united by a singular, desperate goal. The trash bin engine was no longer just Tommy's mad idea. It had become their project, their collective gamble for survival. Every turn of a makeshift wrench, every hammered nail, every piece of charcoal carefully placed into the glowing maw of the gasifier, cemented their fragile trust in Tommy's vision and in each other. The fragile trust in Tommy's vision and in each other would soon face its ultimate test. As days bled into nights, a new, more ominous pressure began to build around them. The sounds of the forest, once a symphony of natural life, morphed into a constant symphony of threats. Distant rumblings, low and heavy, reverberated through the earth, the unmistakable growl of tank tracks, perhaps a panzer division on the move, or troop transports ferrying reinforcements. They could hear the faint, staccato bursts of machine gun fire, closer now than before, signaling engagements happening just beyond their immediate vicinity. The net was tightening. German patrols, emboldened by the earlier skirmishes' evidence, were becoming more frequent, their search patterns more aggressive, their calls echoing eerily through the trees, closing in on their position. Each passing hour hammered home the urgency of their task. The small successes they'd achieved felt minuscule against the backdrop of their impending doom. After what felt like an eternity of grueling, precise work, marred by countless adjustments and near catastrophes, the moment of truth arrived. Tommy, His face smudged with soot and sweat, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, stood before the monstrous, cobbled-together contraption. The metal trash bin, now scarred and blackened, was connected by an intricate network of pipes, hoses, and wires to the jeep's engine. Inside, a slow, controlled burn of charcoal glowed, producing the precious, invisible gas. His men, silent and tense, gathered around him, their breath held captive in their chests, every gaze fixed on Tommy's hands as he made the final, meticulous checks. He gestured to Private Jenkins, who had been tasked with the crucial role of feeding the gasifier, to ensure the charcoal bed was optimal. Corporal Davies was at the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped it, ready to follow Tommy's command. Tommy approached the engine, a makeshift lever controlling the gas flow into the carburetor. He took a deep breath, the smell of burnt wood and desperation thick in the air. With a prayer whispered under his breath, he pulled the lever. "All right, Corporal, try her," he commanded, his voice hoarse but firm. Davies turned the ignition key. The engine coughed. A dry, metallic hack that sent a wave of deflation through the gathered men. Then, another cough, deeper this time, followed by a sputtering, erratic rumble. It was crude, uneven, and sounded like a dying beast, but it was running. A collective gasp escaped the men, quickly followed by a murmuring of disbelief and a few hushed exclamations of awe. The trash-bin engine, a monument to defiance and ingenuity, was alive. A wave of cautious optimism, fragile but potent, washed over them. It wasn't the roar of a perfectly tuned engine, but it was life, a heartbeat in the metallic chest of their battered escape vehicle. Tommy, however, knew this was only the beginning. The engine was operational, but it was far from smooth. He immediately set to work, making critical final adjustments. The gas flow needed fine-tuning, the air mixture calibrated for optimal performance. He adjusted valves, tightened clamps, and listened intently to every nuance of the groaning engine, coaxing it into a more stable rhythm. Meanwhile, the men, infused with a newfound energy, began their final preparations for escape. Ammunition counts were checked, rifles cleaned, and bayonets sharpened. Maps, painstakingly drawn from memory and salvaged fragments, were studied, outlining a treacherous route through enemy-held territory, aiming for a distant, rumored Allied outpost. Their escape would be a desperate race against time and discovery. They cleaned their weapons with renewed vigor, preparing for the inevitable confrontations. Each man meticulously checked his gear, knowing that every detail, every bullet, every scrap of food, could mean the difference between life and death. The jeep, now a symbol of their resourcefulness, was loaded with their few remaining supplies and the wounded. They planned their route, memorizing landmarks, understanding that darkness would be their only true ally. The air, once thick with despair, now crackled with a palpable tension, a mixture of fear and an almost manic readiness. They were not just running, they were fighting for their very existence, armed with a makeshift engine and an unwavering will to survive. Their survival hinged on Tommy's impossible invention and their collective courage to drive it into the jaws of the enemy. Their survival hinged on Tommy's impossible invention and their collective courage to drive it into the jaws of the enemy. Dawn, a pale, hesitant light, began to bleed across the eastern sky, painting the silhouettes of the trees in grim shades of gray. The air, crisp and cold, carried the scent of pine and charred wood. Just as Tommy signaled the final, crucial adjustments were complete, a chilling realization struck them. The muted crunch of boots on fallen leaves, distinct and numerous, was unmistakably close. Then, through the thinning mist, they saw them, a large German patrol, at least 30 strong, fanning out. In a clear search formation. They had been found. A desperate, guttural cry went up from the enemy, followed by the terrifying chatter of machine guns opening fire. Bullets ripped through the foliage, splintering trees and kicking up earth around the jeep. The ambush was swift and brutal, a full-frontal assault designed to pin them down and annihilate them. Tommy barked orders, his voice cutting through the cacophony of gunfire. "Davies, get to the wheel! Jenkins, keep that gasifier fed! Everyone else, provide cover fire!" His men, though outnumbered, responded with a ferocity born of desperation. They returned fire, their rifles spitting defiance, trying to hold back the advancing line of German soldiers. Tommy, meanwhile, wrestled with the gasifier, frantically making final tweaks, urging the trash bin engine to reach full operating capacity. The sputtering coughs were now more consistent, but the jeep needed to move, and quickly, or they would all be overrun. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the shouts of men, both German and American. Bullets whizzed past Tommy's head as he hunched over the engine, his hands a blur of motion. He tightened a clamp, adjusted a makeshift valve, coaxing every ounce of power from the improbable contraption. Davies, his face grim, kept the engine revs as high as possible, the jeep bucking and shuddering under the strain. One of their men, Private Miller, cried out as a bullet grazed his arm, but he continued to fire, his face a mask of pain and resolve. Another, Sergeant O'Malley, took a round to the shoulder, slumping against the side of the jeep, but still clutching his rifle, ready to defend his comrades. The German lines were closing in, their shouts of "Halt!" growing louder, more insistent. Then, with a final, desperate adjustment from Tommy, the engine roared to life, not with the smooth hum of a factory-built machine, but with a defiant, throaty gargle that promised motion. "Go, Davies, go!" Tommy yelled, scrambling into the passenger seat. Davies slammed his foot on the accelerator, and with a lurch and a cloud of acrid charcoal smoke, the trash bin engine lurched forward. The jeep, a symbol of their impossible defiance, burst through the German lines, smashing through a hastily erected barricade of felled logs. The escape was a chaotic blur of motion, a high-speed chase through the treacherous, uneven terrain of the forest. The Germans, caught off guard by the jeep's sudden charge, were momentarily stunned, but quickly recovered, their machine guns unleashing a torrent of lead. Bullets pinged off the jeep's metal frame, shattering the windshield. The crude gasifier, mounted precariously on the back, became a target, but its sturdy construction held. Davies swerved violently, dodging trees and shell craters, the jeep bouncing and rattling, threatening to fall apart at any moment. The men in the back returned fire, trying to suppress the pursuing enemy, their eyes scanning for potential flanks. It was during this desperate dash that the true cost of their escape became clear. As they sped past a particularly dense thicket, a German machine gun nest opened fire, raking the side of the jeep. Corporal Davies swerved again, narrowly avoiding a direct hit, but the jeep lost valuable momentum. Private Thompson, a quiet, unassuming man who had worked tirelessly on the gasifier, knew what he had to do. Without a word, he grabbed a discarded German grenade, pulled the pin, and with a grunt of effort threw himself from the moving vehicle. "Go! Don't stop!" he roared, a desperate defiance in his voice, as he detonated the grenade near the machine gun nest, silencing it in a flash of fire and smoke. His sacrifice, though unbidden, gave the jeep the precious seconds it needed to gain distance, to pull away from the immediate danger. The men in the jeep looked back, their hearts heavy with grief and gratitude, but there was no time to mourn. Thompson's heroic act had bought them a reprieve, but the sounds of pursuit still echoed behind them. The sense of camaraderie and shared fate was palpable, a silent understanding passing between them. They were a unit, bound by the horrors they had witnessed and the impossible odds they had overcome. Each man knew that their survival was inextricably linked, that one man's courage, one man's sacrifice, illuminated the path for them all. The jeep, belching smoke and defying all logic, pounded onward, carrying its precious cargo of wounded, exhausted, but fiercely determined men deeper into the woods, towards an uncertain future, but away from certain death. The jeep, belching smoke and defying all logic, pounded onward, carrying its precious cargo of wounded, exhausted, but fiercely determined men deeper into the woods, towards an uncertain future, but away from certain death. Hours blurred into a grueling, torturous odyssey. The crude gasifier, a constant source of anxiety, demanded constant attention, its insatiable hunger for charcoal forcing frequent, terrifying stops in dimly lit clearings to replenish its fuel. Tommy, despite his profound weariness, never relinquished his vigil over the makeshift engine, his ears attuned to every hiccup and groan, his hands instinctively making micro-adjustments to the inflow of gas and air. Corporal Davies, though wounded, drove with a singular focus, his eyes fixed on the barely discernible track ahead, navigating treacherous turns and avoiding hidden potholes that threatened to tear the fragile vehicle apart. The men in the back, nursing their injuries, remained alert, their rifles ready, every shadow a potential enemy, every distant sound a renewed threat. Hope, a fragile seedling, struggled to take root in the harsh soil of their exhaustion. Then, as the faint light of a new dawn began to break through the dense canopy, painting the forest in hues of gray and soft gold, a distant landmark appeared, a dilapidated old water tower, its rusty frame silhouetted against the nascent sun. It was a prearranged signal, a beacon known only to Allied intelligence and a handful of specialized units. They had reached Allied lines. The confirmation was a wave of overwhelming relief, so potent it threatened to buckle their knees. They had done it. They had truly made it. The jeep sputtered to a final, glorious halt just beyond a hastily erected barbed wire fence, near a small, camouflaged Allied outpost. The soldiers there, initially wary of the strange, smoke-belching vehicle, quickly lowered their rifles as they recognized the tattered American uniforms. They were battered, bruised, and profoundly exhausted, their faces streaked with soot and grime, their clothes torn. Several of them collapsed onto the damp earth, tears of sheer exhaustion and relief streaming down their faces. All 12 men, including the wounded, were accounted for. Alive. Reunited. The emotional conclusion to their ordeal was not just about Tommy's astonishing ingenuity, though that was undeniable. It was a profound testament to the collective, unyielding will to survive that had burned fiercely within each of them. It was about the indomitable human spirit that refused to be extinguished by the brutal realities of war. The bonds forged in those desperate days, cemented by shared adversity and mutual reliance, were stronger than any steel. They had faced overwhelming odds, staring death in the face repeatedly, and yet they had found a way. Tommy, the quiet mechanic burdened by personal loss, had risen to become their unlikely savior, his refusal to give up infectious, breathing life into a plan that defied all logic. The trash bin engine, a crude, ugly contraption born of necessity, transcended its humble origins. It became more than just a means of transport. It was a potent symbol of human resilience, a defiant middle finger to despair, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners of human conflict, inventiveness and courage could carve a path to hope. It was a reminder that true strength often emerges from the most unlikely of places, from the most desperate of circumstances. This incredible tale of Sergeant Tommy Miller and his trash bin engine is just one of countless unsung stories from history's tumultuous chapters. For every grand battle remembered, there are 1,000 quiet acts of heroism, ingenuity, and sheer human grit that often go untold. These are the stories that remind us of the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people. If this story touched you, if it sparked a flicker of inspiration, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear a tale of resilience, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the hidden annals of history. We're constantly unearthing these poignant moments, these incredible feats of resourcefulness that define us as a species. What are your own stories of human ingenuity? Have you encountered tales of incredible solutions born from desperate times? Share them in the comments section below. We love hearing from our community. Next time, we'll be exploring the daring exploits of a covert special operations unit whose innovative use of deception turned the tide of a critical coastal defense. Thank you for watching, and remember, history is full of surprises.